When Zelenskyy says that he hasn't received $100 billion, what does that actually mean? Does it mean it just hasn't gotten to Ukraine yet?
It means, money,
it doesn't mean it's missing?
It's not. No, it's not missing. Well, though.
So this is the thing that people are saying. It's like Tucker Carlson was talking about this. And he was essentially saying that there's a bunch of people that are spending money, and he went to some wealthy ski town, and these Ukrainians, they're all super wealthy, and he thinks that some of that is
Yeah, he's not going out on a limb there, right? I mean, look, Ukraine, one of their big problems over years and years has been corruption and fraud. And one of the reasons why, there was pushback against, this idea of NATO, even though back in 2008 or 2008, at a European summit, they actually said during the NATO summit, they said, yes, at some point in the future, Ukraine and Georgia, will become members of NATO. We're not going to give you a timetable. We're not going to tell you what that's going to look like, but you can become members of NATO. But one of the problems has been the level of corruption within Ukraine. So is some of that money, both from the U.S. and from the EU, gone missing and lining pockets? Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. Look at Iraq, the money that we spent in Iraq, and how much. I mean, just any time you've got government disbursement of that size, look at fucking COVID fraud, right?
Right.
Anytime you got money going out in large buckets from the U.S. government, you're going to have fraud.
Gonna have some fraud.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, you're going to have people who are going to take advantage of it. So, yeah, that's not a surprise, and Tucker's right for pointing it out. I'm just saying it's not rocket science. How much? Well, that's, again, you would like to think that DOGE, one of their jobs would be to go, and I think if there was more transparency in how the money is spent, as there should be, right? I mean, then maybe the taxpayers would be a little bit more understanding or lenient, and if
they're not going to be lenient or understanding for any fraud where people are getting rich off of this.
Right.
And there are people that are getting rich off of this. I remember there was one guy that had to resign because it turned out he had somehow or another moved around $1 billion that he shouldn't have. Remember that story?
$1 billion. Yeah.
And he's like, well, I'll just step off. And so he kind of went away, and
he's living on a yacht.
There's these stories, and it's so confusing because, we're getting the mainstream media version of what's going on versus boots on the ground. Where's the money actually going?
Yeah.
What is actually happening? Why did Russia actually invade in the first place?
Look, the European nations and European institutions have allocated more money to Ukraine than the U.S. has, right? I mean, they're up to, depending on numbers you look at, they're up to maybe $130 billion allocated in financial. And
how much have we allocated?
Probably about 120 billion.
I thought it was way more than that. I thought it was 100 billion, where Zelenskyy said he hasn't received it.
No, well, when I say allocated, not all of it's been dispersed, right?
Right.
So now the U.S. is the leading military provider of military hardware gear. But if you combine humanitarian, financial, and military all together, EU institutions and EU countries have actually allocated more than the U.S. has.
Oh.
And that, logic would say buys them a seat at the table for any peace talks, aside from the fact that they're sitting right there, close to Russia. They've taken in a vast number of Ukrainian refugees. You've got Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania sitting right there on the border with Russia. They've got a real reason to want to be involved. But, again, Trump saying, let's just start the conversation with Russia, it's forced the EU to say, okay, how do we get involved? How do we rethink? Much like the Arab states with the Gaza issue. So now they're saying, well, Keir Starmer over in the UK is saying, we'd be willing to put boots on the ground for some sort of peacekeeping force. And other nations, some are pushing back. Poland, Germany, they're I don't know about deploying troops to Ukraine to enforce some sort of peace deal, but they're talking, right? And that accelerated the process. So, they'll have to be involved, and Ukraine will certainly have to be involved. What are you going to do? You got an invaded country,
right?
And they're not going to be involved in the future of what happens to the invaded country. So they'll be involved, and Marco Rubio has said as much. But I think it's good. I think people are really up in arms over the idea that they've started the talk without the Ukrainians sitting at the table. But I don't think there's any intention in any plausible scenario where the U.S. doesn't get them involved here in the very near future, because otherwise it's going nowhere.